Right, and so good morning again. We're back with another edition of Right Aligned, a Friday staple, which is a nice way just to start the weekend for us. We're joined by Robin from Rockabye today. Just before we get going, if anybody is interested in some of the things that we've done before the events, we've now got a library on YouTube which is filling up nicely for anybody to catch up with things that we've done in the past. And we're working on a little partnership with Design Calendar, who is a great website with physical and digital events around the world, as well as their own community of different things like portfolio crits and other sort of social events that they do online, so check them out. Rowan, while we're letting people in and just get going, is it possible for you to take us back to as far back as you can remember, or you want to reveal, of when design or creativity really first played a role in your life, and just lead us through up to education and in the early sort of stages of your life in design?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. So I think the earliest kind of instance that I can remember is the Christmas card competition when I was kind of around 4 years old, that my mum kind of pushed me to enter, and I won it 2 years on the trot at primary school, so I was pretty chuffed with that. But subsequently, I used to be kind of obsessed with Arsenal Football Club. Kind of as they entered, I suppose, like the Arsene Wenger era, and I used to just draw football kits over and over again, just kind of constantly, and that sort of then kind of continued into basically just drawing all the time drawing. So that was my kind of basis. Found out about design, wanted to kind of be a graphic designer for as long as I could remember before I even knew what it was. And then basically just sort of channeled what I was doing in that sense the whole way through education. So got really into art and photography when I was at school and college, did an art foundation, found graphics that was, it kind of seemed like a sensible way to try and make a living out of creativity, I suppose. Then ended up at Falmouth University, studying graphic design, which is kind of, as a uni, it's really focused on kind of creative thought and conceptual thinking as well. It's not just like how nice does it look. Mm-hmm. That kind of, I think, helped forge my kind of path and how I started to approach design. From there, just kind of went into industry, did a few placements, some at like kind of quite large agencies. So I did a placement at Fitch and met some great people there, who then subsequently have gone on to like kind of be kind of creative directors at amazing agencies like Vault 49 and various other things like that. But then ended up settling at a company called Social, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was a really good grounding for me, because of the type of work that it did. So it's kind of a mix of brand identity, music videos, traditional print graphics, all of the kind of everything basically you could probably think about. Yeah. It was before social media was kind of like the thing. So basically just kind of continued my education really for the next kind of 5 years or so at that kind of small agency. Joined a retail design company after that, which is kind of one of those things that I was kind of blinded by the lights in terms of clients. I was like, oh wow, they work with kind of massive sports companies and all of the kind of the stuff that I suppose you aspire to when you're a bit younger. But then working within it, it's not necessarily the type of work when you're kind of in retail that's the most creatively satisfying, I suppose. And in that sense, kind of was always looking for more, basically. That was my sort of basis and how I kind of got to roughly where I was when I started Rockabye.
Amazing. Yeah, just going back to those not really early, was that your childhood with the Arsenal and the Christmas card? Especially the football thing. I mean, that in today's world, the football kit design has gone like stratospheric, isn't it? And so you can do whatever you like, especially like the new Nike releases, especially with I think they've got quite an adaptable system now, haven't they? You can. I've been quite a big fan of that in the past myself, and had a sort of a catalogue of shirts of Nigeria World Cup shirts in recent times, all the way back to like something like Italian 90 sort of. And then that progression, was that more of a love of the sport, the game, the club, or was that just that the colour, the patterns, the vibrancy of those kits? Thinking, what was that sort of time? Are we talking about Ian Wright sort of era with the blue, the two blues, wasn't that, like turquoise and the blue, and that?
Yeah, like the lightning bolt.
Yeah. And then the banana. What was the banana? It's got a name, hasn't it? I can't remember what it's specific.
Yeah, bruised banana kit.
Bruised banana, that's it. Yeah.
Like the early 90s.
Yeah, was that around that sort of era when things were starting to change and it was a bit more dynamic, wasn't it? It wasn't just before the Premier League when, that was also like a new brand, wasn't it? It was very much about the future and a modern sort of game, and people becoming sort of celebrities. Was that what sort of you fell into? Is that the reason why? Is that something sparked something in you?
I think it was probably kind of pattern and color. So as opposed to kind of thinking about it from like a kind of a celebrity perspective, it was definitely like the graphic side of things that I was quite interested by, and the way that they were using it to kind of I suppose add kind of impetus and like kind of speed to what they were showing. It's one of those things that I think I could have liked cricket, and I could have liked ballet even, and I would have still been like designing different kind of kits or outfits or uniforms for it. It's almost kind of like the fact that it was Arsenal and football was almost irrelevant. And what I liked doing was like my parents were my mum was a teacher and my dad was a policeman, so we didn't have like a lot of money. But I used to get kind of like a blue just a blue shirt and then like be cutting up bits and bobs to alter it so that it felt more like a football kit and that sort of thing. So it's about getting my hands dirty, as well as like, I suppose before I really understood what I was even doing, it was just kind of playing and experimenting in that sense. That's kind of where I kind of enjoyed creativity at that point in my life.
Yeah, I suppose that ties in well with you saying that you didn't really realise it was graphic design, so to speak. That's much more of a craft thing, isn't it? Arts and craft. That's much more as what kids do, isn't it? Get dirty, get your hands in there, and sort of just play with the concept, don't you? So then you moved on to design. Did you do before Falmouth? Was there like college experiences there? Was that?
I went to a sixth form college in Brighton called Basvik, and it was a like kind of really well kitted out place. And obviously Brighton's quite like a creative and vibrant city, and it kind of had everything that I needed. So like learned all about kind of traditional photography methods and had a dark room and all of that side of things. So I got to experiment with image making in that sense. And then the art department there was kind of basically kitted out pretty much like university as well. So it had everything you could possibly need. So that was my kind of college experience. And it was just really, it was exciting for me to be able to experiment with kind of like oil paints and like really kind of messing up imagery and build from that, I suppose. And I think each of these different kind of experiences from when you're little definitely like start to kind of forge like kind of what you do in the future. So like if you learn about photography when you're in your kind of formative years, it can help with composition when you get into kind of later on in life and later on in your industry experience. So that's,
Did that expose you to graphics at college then, to then take the step to Falmouth? Was that a natural progression, or was that just a mixture of disciplines and styles just to play with?
Well, so it was a mixture of disciplines and styles to play with. But if I go back to secondary school, there was a graphics course, which wasn't really, it's not what you would like think of as graphic design now. But it was kind of, it taught you kind of bits of technical drawing and stuff like that. Like it had a proper drawing board and kind of trying to understand like kind of golden ratios and that side of things. So it's like you were learning bits and bobs then as well. And I think that kids now will absolutely be more aware of what graphic design is. But I just, from a really young age, I was just like, I want to be a graphic designer. And it took me quite a while to figure out what that was.
What do you think that was, though, that it's not that necessarily figuring out what it is as a job or discipline? What was it, do you think that was inside? Is there any sort of clues now you've got older? Let's think there was a trigger point within that story that you think, or was it just maybe, like listening to what you said so far, was it just an amalgamation of the football kits, the Christmas cards, all those bits that have just come together?
It was, I think maybe the term graphics is the misleading part here. So I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to make things that had purpose. and that meant something, as opposed to just like, I didn't want to make Christmas cards out of pasta forever. So I just wanted to get to a point where I was like designing something that meant something. And there's a great TV program actually. Now this must have been when I was like in my early teens. I saw this show about a group of engineers that swapped kind of like building bridges to go and join Reebok in the States to learn how to design trainers. So then I was like, that's amazing. So maybe I could be a trainer designer. And then obviously with the football kits, I was like, perhaps I could be a football kit designer. But then you get to a point where you just like, actually, as you start to kind of narrow down to like, I think I'm going to be a graphic designer, and this is the course that I'm now going to go and do at Falmouth. And yeah, so that's kind of where it led me, basically.
Yeah, it's quite a funny one, isn't it? That what these sort of phrases or terminologies, what they sort of really, they can sometimes get a bit quite confusing when you're young, can't they, to understand. Like, yeah, when I was young, like the idea of graphics, you couldn't even do graphics at school when I was young.
Yeah.
It sounded like something that only Hollywood did or something. Is this graphics? It was still like space age at the time, and really it's just all design, isn't it? And how we we all sort of follow that same theme. It's just that we do it in different sort of areas.
Absolutely.
One thing I'm fascinated is about Falmouth. I've heard a lot about it and spoke to a couple of people that have been there, but as someone that just focused pretty much solely on just creativity and design. What is it that they do specifically? Because I have quite a lot of conversations with people that have come out of university that maybe feel a bit shortchanged by the process. Or they feel like they've maybe been taught by people that are potentially a bit out of touch or not been in the industry for a while, or they get given some of the more specifics, such as software sort of side of it, but the actual learning how to integrate yourself into a studio or with other people, or conduct yourself, or what to put in a portfolio, for instance. They sometimes feel like those bits are missing.
Yeah.
Somewhere like Falmouth that is specific to design and creativity. What is it that they do that that's very sort of helps you on that sort of career ladder, or that process of fitting into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was there, it was before the Adobe suite as such, not pre-Photoshop, but it's before everything was kind of packaged into the sort of conglomerate that it is now. So the kind of the technical teachings, and it was long enough ago now that probably most of these people aren't there, so I can say it like fairly confidently, but like the technical side of things from a software perspective wasn't the best, to be honest. But what it does is change how you think about problems and challenges. So it absolutely focuses all of its students to think about things from a conceptual perspective, and really drills into that. So one of the first projects that you have to do when you go to Falmouth is build a physical manifestation of a head. So then you get to university and I'm going to learn to be a graphic designer now. I'm going to be like doing like really shit hot graphics for various different brands. But like now like cut up some cans and make a head. So at the time you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this, and it's basically like that for the whole first year. There's very little kind of actual, or at least it was when I was there, like actual graphic design as you would kind of imagine it in industry. It's much more about kind of thinking differently and producing work that means something. And I think that's why it's a particularly good university. And there's a few more as well. I think that Nottingham is very similar in the way that it approaches things. And I know that Norwich always used to kind of be along kind of similar lines as well. But I think it's that makes it kind of exceptional in my mind, and probably puts it or elevates the students, again, just my opinion, but elevates them above kind of a lot of the London unis and certainly some of the other major city universities.
Was that quite an odd experience at the time? You sort of experience some of these, the idea of seeing graphics around and being sort of finding your feet in what was said from your early days, your childhood.
Yeah.
And then sort of maybe thinking that you're going to step into university where you can just be creatively free, like you say, design like concept for Nike or whatever it might be, whatever fascinated you at the time.
Yeah.
And then to go into this idea that you're sort of deconstructing all of that and sort of from a bit of an arts perspective, isn't it? So sort of
Yeah.
I think I spoke to someone else that had been there, and they had to put something like 400 forks together
Yeah.
to make a canvas or something. But when you
Yeah.
think about that, that's that conceptual thinking and understanding what you're trying to achieve with a brand or a live project for a client.
Yeah.
Because I didn't go through the university process, that's sort of taken me about 20 years to understand that, and I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
Project. So, however that strange that might have been at the time, it must have also been amazingly rewarding. Now you're where you're at now, to think back. I was expecting.
Absolutely. I do think like everyone that I know that went there, and my peers from the same peer group, all of us are very appreciative of it now. I think at the time we were like, what is this? Like, what am I doing? But we understand now that it's kind of like, it basically had to break down everything that we were doing and get rid of all the kind of like the sort of our preconceptions of what we should be doing, break it all down, like, and then build up conceptual thinking from that point. And that's as I say, that's the thing that really makes that university in particular, I think, like kind of special. And also the fact that it's by the sea and it's so far away from everywhere that you can't really get back home. So you kind of, once you move down there, like you really live there. So like all of us kind of made really kind of like dear friends and like great roots there as well. And I think that I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of us later on in life end up kind of living down that way.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think it sort of becomes, because of where it is, it's like a retreat, isn't it, in some respects? You're sort of isolated, and you sort of have to really buy into it, don't you, in some ways, forces
Absolutely.
you to be a part of that. And it's like a little community of its own, isn't it?
Yeah.
So many sort of bigger universities in the centre of the country or in big areas, it's quite easy to escape, isn't it, if you want to.
Yeah.
Moving into your career then, say it was at Fitch was your first role?
Yeah, so I did a couple of internships, and Fitch was the kind of the one that I did before I joined the really small company, Social. So I got kind of an early, I suppose, like an early education of a large company. I don't know if it was WPP at that point or not, but it was. If it wasn't, it was certainly on the verge of being owned by them. And like, it was kind of a massive office in Paddington. Sort of all the kind of people that you would think would be like doing amazingly creative work. And I think that on the whole, most of them were happy, but I got there and kind of did like mouse mats for M&S and stuff like that, like designed mouse mats and things. I was just like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is like, this isn't quite what I had in my mind when I was thinking about what I was going to go and do. So I think that so that was my first experience of a big company and kind of what that means, which isn't always the most fulfilling, I suppose, creatively. But then moving from there, my first kind of full-time role was at a company called Social. I saw the guy that owned it last night, actually went for a beer with him, and so nice to catch up with him. But the company itself, as I say, was like, it was a mixture of kind of traditional print graphics, kind of branding, less strategy focused, but much more like I suppose emotional in terms of how things were produced. Traditional graphics and print and that side of things, but then bits of packaging too, plus music videos, plus bits of animation. So it was kind of the sort of the small design shop that I think at that point I probably needed, because I don't know if I was necessarily the best designer. I'm not the best designer, but I wasn't at that point either, coming out of uni. So I needed something that was going to broaden my skill set, I think, and that's the place that did it.
Yeah, well, just quickly, I've done mouse mats for Coventry Council, so you've definitely top trumped the mouse mat design. M&S is far more exciting than Council. Just make it blue. That was
just the thought that people had mouse mats now. I'm like, what? Yeah. Can't get my head around it.
So Social then sounds like it was. What was the timeline to that? Quickly,
so graduated in 2007. Was at Fitch for a few months. So I suppose just at the end of 2007, joined Social, basically just before the massive financial crash.
Yeah. So even though that doesn't sound very long ago, in the world of design, that's like a lifetime, isn't it, really? Because of how fast things move or have moved. So they were pretty much I worked at somewhere very similar by the sounds of it. And at the time, I think it was quite confusing because you could be doing a very traditional print campaign. Yeah. And then something maybe a bit more experimental, because of like, the nature of music industry.
Yeah.
And it can be quite confusing, couldn't it? Well, it was for me at the time, because it was like, where are we going with this? And you start to question, maybe wrongly, like the sort of direction of the company. It had nothing to do with me really at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite nice to feel like you're pushing in one direction, I think, with design. Yeah, and that seems to be more apparent in today's world, because there's so many more niche disciplines, and like we were saying just before this, that you can work in very specific areas. So you know that you're already sort of going in that direction. Yeah. Was that just sort of more of a great learning curve, or was it, did you feel a bit like it needed to go in a specific area, or was it a personal thing that you wanted to go somewhere, or was it just a case of, this is brilliant, I'm just being exposed to a lot of different things and it's just fun while it lasted?
Yeah, I think I was intentionally, at that point, I didn't want to go in a particular direction. Like, I didn't want to be like a branding designer, and I didn't want to be a packaging designer, and I had no kind of real desire at that point to work like purely on massive brands with massive clients either. So for me, it was really interesting to kind of really stretch my skill set as far as it could go in as many different directions as possible. And I think the thing that's interesting about that is it's maybe a much more rounded creative now than maybe some of my contemporaries are, which is that's no slight on them. They're almost certainly going to be better at branding than I am, or better at packaging than I would be. But to have that knowledge means that I can use like certain aspects of my history and my understanding of those in different spheres now. So, and without that kind of broad upbringing, I wouldn't be able to. So yeah, it has been useful.
Yeah, I think I found more and more as I've got older into the industry, it's sort of like all these sort of things at the time you might sort of see them at the skin's surface, but it's really like a scrapbook, isn't it, that you pick up these things as you go along. And
yeah,
it's managing people or building a business. It's all about you draw upon those experiences.
Yeah.
I think in moving to retail design, what does that really look like? Is that working for a specific company that you're creating all the stuff that you see in a shop, or was that more of a bigger business that worked with a number of individual clients or brands?
Yeah, it was so retail design. I have experience of it from one company, but for me it's kind of like, it's almost from a graphic design perspective, it's throwaway graphics. Because of seasonal change in kind of stock, essentially. So it's highly driven by trend. It is all the kind of stuff that you see in store, so anything printed, like wayfinding, so kind of really understanding like customer flows and stuff like that. So it's kind of, there's a science to it, but I think that from a pure creative graphic design perspective, it's not the most fulfilling, because it's kind of like, this needs to be a certain size so that people can see it from the other side of whatever shop they're in, kind of thing. There's little moments within that you can kind of get real kind of moments of interest. So I kind of worked with one of the senior designers at the company I was at, and like we crafted a new typeface for a massive brand, and like, so there's things that you can do which are interesting within it, but it never quite like hit the highs that I think maybe I'd had in the previous role, where you'd have like moments where you're like, that was really great, that project, I loved it, and you have moments which are nice, but it never quite hit the highs for me.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by that concept, and that goes to quite a lot of industries. So like, tourism, for instance, that's very obviously naturally seasonal. So you hear people say they're talking about next year's Christmas during the summer, and then vice versa. But the idea that at the moment things like fast fashion is quite a hot topic, isn't it? Because of obviously the sort of chain of that for the people that make the clothing, the wages and the conditions, and the way that people engage with that and consume that sort of stuff. It always makes me wonder, is that mentality deep rooted in the whole company? So the idea that you'll create something like a massive window display, say a company like New Look or Tottenham when they were around, they've got multiple big sites across the country. That stuff then just gets put up and ripped down and then just binned. Does it just get thrown away? That mentality must, if you're not that way inclined as an individual, that must be quite grating and quite difficult to sort of see that happening all the time.
Yeah,
you know, the clothes are just as throwaway as the team is, as the, you know, the marketing is, as all the other parts of that business, which are
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, that is, I think, unless you kind of work for a company that's incredibly environmentally conscientious, within the retail sphere, this is like, that is what happens. So you produce these amazing things, but it's like single-use plastic, or it's foam board which can't be recycled, and then, or it's like a specific type of ink which looks amazing in a window, but you can't then recycle it, so it has to just go to landfill. And I think that I think this kind of, that's like, it's sort of a microcosm of a larger kind of capitalist inspired industry, I suppose. Like design in itself and graphics, I think it's starting to shift a little bit, and I think people are becoming more environmentally conscientious and that side of things. But at the end of the day, like if you work for a retail company, it's to drive sales for your client.
Yeah.
So then, like, as soon as you're just trying to drive sales, you're trying to get them as much money as possible. And then if everything's about money, like, where there's like limited, there becomes less and less room for creativity, basically.
Yeah. It just costs, anything that costs money has to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So was that from that experience, was that then the catalyst to start your own business? And was Rockabye the first thing that you started? Was there other things that you'd done before? And if not, how did that sort of, you know, where was that born and who with?
Yeah, so it was really, so I kind of, I started to get a little bit frustrated. And this, again, this is no slight on the company I was at previously at all. Like, I think they do a lot of good, and they're very kind employers and look after their staff as much as they can. And I think that, but I did start to get a bit frustrated, and I started to kind of look at the output. I was like, I feel like I could do this, and more than just the design output. I was like, I feel like I could try and create a company that would like really be caring for people. Like you get to a point where you're like, I want to create like the design utopia for the future designers of the world. But I got frustrated with the output. And again, no slight on the previous company I was at, but also specifically with the kind of the motion output and animation. And I started looking at kind of the work we were producing, and I was like, this is like working for kind of really kind of large sports brands, and the work's not, I don't think it's good enough. And I got chatting to a friend of mine from university, who's on this call actually.
Is that the guy with the great photo?
It is, yeah, the baby face, yeah.
That's the greatest Zoom picture I've ever seen.
So there's a story about those. So he's got a baby face image, but we now have kind of internally a set of Jamojis, which are basically all of the kind of emojis that you can imagine using this face. But anyway, I digress. But I got chatting to him and his background. So I went to University of James, lived with him in the final year, and we were chatting at that point to another friend as well. But we started talking about the fact that from a post-production and heavy animation side of things, so James's background was kind of working for some of the biggest post houses in London, kind of across advertising and in film. And he was kind of like, it's basically no thought is given to anything ahead of it being animated. So like someone just like chuck him a logo and be like, now animate it, and be like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like it's not been considered properly. And I was on the flip of that. I was like, I feel like we should be able to be doing more kind of conceptual and better finished animation work. And like those two kind of schools of thought started to come together, and we started talking more and more and more, to the point where we're like, right, let's start a company that does that then. Still very much like it's going to be a design utopia, it's going to be amazing, we're going to everyone's going to love it, we're going to hire loads of staff, they're going to be great, they're going to love it as well. But then we set it up, and then kind of it's moved from there basically.
So you started, so that motion animation was that was really the core focus, you know, because you sort of do quite a bit of branding work, don't you, as well now?
Yeah.
Was that something you were conscious of at the time, or was it really just let's be the best, or let's create something new, or let's take that discipline of motion animation first and sort of put that, really send that to a new level?
So when we started, we kind of, in our heads, we were just going to work direct with clients, like direct to client, and that was all we were going to do. And we wanted to put brand in motion and motion in brand. So like that was kind of our initial thinking, and kind of like various different catchphrases that we came up with. Like when you're starting a company, you're like constantly thinking of ways that you can surmise exactly what it is that you do. But like we talked about simplicity in motion and like all of these things, and just trying to basically, like, when you start a company, you don't do it because of all the things that you loved at your previous ones. You do it because of all the stuff you didn't like. So like overcomplicated process. So when we first started, we're like, we're not going to have any account managers. Like we're just going to do that, like creatives talking direct to clients and that side of things. So you have kind of these grandiose plans which you start with, and then obviously the company starts and like the real world hits at that point. So like we do have account managers now, and they're incredibly helpful and useful, and like quite important parts of the company. But yeah, so that's kind of that's why it kind of started. And I think subsequently we're still kind of have that ethos. Like we still want to kind of have like heavily conceptual animation, and we want to make sure that the kind of level of finish for brand is really kind of top level as well. And that's the thinking behind it. But we don't now also just work direct to client. So our kind of experience, I think, is becoming more common, but we also collaborate with other design agencies. So we collaborate with branding agencies, advertising agencies as well, starting to do a lot more work with, and I think that kind of overall experience and knowledge of how these kind of different facets of industry work, that's what kind of makes Rockabye unique, I think, and why we can work in certain ways which perhaps other agencies can't.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. Is that I never really realised how much that went on until I sort of went solo, and how I think beforehand I was just thought that was what freelancers did. They just sort of picked up little scraps of work here, there, everywhere, and they sort of just did that sort of quite nomadic sort of lifestyle. But actually, agencies have a lot with each other, and I think in a modern sort of design industry, that is really, really good. It's a nice,
yeah.
You build those relationships. It's really nice, because when I was first in the industry, it was very much you don't talk to other agencies because they might steal our work, or they're still the clients, or they're still staff and stuff.
Yeah.
But really, when you look back at that, that's such a negative sort of standoffish approach to have, or opinion to have.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can work hand in hand, I just don't think maybe it's broadcast as much for various reasons. It might be just disclaimers or NDAs, all those sorts of things. But it's a really interesting way to work, because you sort of, if you can understand what you're great at and what somebody else might need that they're not great at.
Yeah.
Just like collaborating with an individual, isn't it? And like we were saying beforehand, the increase in illustration in branding. I mean, there aren't many, well, I don't know any actually agencies that employ a full-time illustrator or illustrators. Yeah. They just find the best ones that suit a certain brand or project.
Yeah.
They create a unique piece. So is that something that you also do yourself, is collaborate? You might work with other agencies. Do you bring other people in yourselves to sort of work on specific things?
Yeah. So illustrators, yes, absolutely. Obviously, kind of looking at the brief at hand, like who's right for that job, and we'll often go down that route. There's also kind of from a CG animation production standpoint, like there's some kind of real technical specialisms, which so like just as an example, like crowd simulations. As a company of our size, so we'll be 8 people in the next kind of month or two. It would be an error for us to hire someone that just does crowd simulations, because it's a waste of time. But we absolutely would get that person in and make sure they were the best of the best in order to do that piece of work. So it's quite a complex line of business when you're kind of looking at CG and that side of things. So absolutely using specialisms makes sense from a freelance perspective.
Right. So what was it in say traditionally, or years gone by, say let's go back 10, 15 years, in your line of work? Was that more of the privy of big TV studios and film production companies? Is that really what they were doing, and now it's been broken down like a lot of other creative industries? Is that who really dominated that in years gone by?
Yeah, it's basically. So like large post houses would have handled all of that side of things. I think that what's quite interesting now is even looking at branding agencies, the people that they're collaborating with. In the past, it would have been like, we have to go to Framestore, or we have to go to X and Y, whoever else. But now, like, I was looking at a job that someone just posted for Olympia, and they've just worked with We Are 17. So that, like, even the way that they're kind of collaborating, they're working with the sort of types of company which are kind of lower level in terms of staff numbers, but quality wise, there's very little difference now, especially if you kind of combine that conceptual kind of ideology with the technical prowess as well. So then you're kind of like, you're equally as good for certain types of jobs as a large post house, but cheaper. So like,
yeah, I saw that Olympia project this week. I'm not sure if it was released this week, but I've only just seen it. It might have been yesterday or the day before, actually. But yeah, no, I fully agree, because I was speaking to a guy last week who creates kinetic type things like stickers for Instagram, and when you look at his sort of social pages, it's just sort of typographic animations. But he was saying, like, just through buttering their tags on social media during lockdown, he then got clients like Netflix and Nike and all the rest of it, because they're just wanting to work on a very specific job. You know, it's not like it's a long-term contract or they're going to employ him full time.
Yeah,
it's just, they just want something based upon the sort of type of energy that he's brought, or the trend that he's in at the moment.
Yeah,
I think that's really key, isn't it? Is to follow or continue to do what you do and not adapt too much to just to suit a client you might see, or to win work. It's about just staying true to yourself. But from when you guys first started, what does that look like for anybody that's sort of thinking about going solo? That's this idea you can see the potential and the gap to, you know, to really push motion animation to a new level. It was based upon the failings maybe of pushing it too much at your old company.
Yeah.
You then sort of sat there with James in a room, and then it dawns on you that you've got no clients, you've got no money, and you don't know how to sort of really start a business. Where do you go in those early days? What is that? Is that just let's just contact as many people as possible, let's just you know, reach out into our network, or speak to old employers and just sort of pick bits up? What does that really look like?
I mean, it looks like a mess, basically. So James, before we started, he was freelance anyway, and that's where his kind of like the sort of massive amount of experience comes from, and he's got experience with lots of different kind of massive post houses. But I quit my job, and I think I had about 2 months worth of money saved, just personal. I didn't have any money to put into the business, just 2 months. And I'd only recently bought a flat. So like, I was like, I've got to, I literally don't have any money, but it seemed like it was like now or never. So we did that. We went to the pub a lot leading up to it to try and figure out what it is we were supposed to be doing. Took ages to think of a name. Like, we kind of got to a point where we just like looking at each other and like just saying items of clothing, seeing if it would work. So like hat or ladder in the pub and that sort of thing. So that took ages, and it's so hard doing anything for yourself. But one of these trips to the pub, we met someone called Siobhan, who was after a bit of post work, and it turns out that her business partner also owned this like beautiful building in Angel, and they had kind of spare desks basically. So James and I ended up in there like doing favors so that we didn't have to pay for the desks initially, but so we were kind of in there together, just lied to everybody about like what it was that we were. So we'd use this amazing building and be like, check out our office, and so that kind of helped. Our experience in the past and kind of like being quite close with certain clients meant that James could approach some of his old colleagues that he'd worked with at NTV, and I could do something similar with Global Radio. So like, who you know is really important if you don't have anyone to sort of start with client-wise, because obviously you can only talk to people who only talk to you if you know them a bit. So we kind of we did a lot of that, and then just kind of muddling through really for the first year. I was using an iMac from like literally from 2007, and we had a laptop which we kind of sort of favorably labeled the laptop. Just like a solid state hard drive, which I bought from my old company for a couple £100, and that was pretty much the start of it, really. And then we did enough work, so we had enough money that we could then buy computers, and like it just continually grows from that, really.
I don't want to dwell on this pub experience too much, but on day, let me just rewind a little bit. So on day, say 37 of getting tipsy,
Yeah,
and there's two blokes in the local spoon shouting out socks,
yeah,
Hat and Parker, like some crazy game you play at school. You then bumped into somebody that wanted some work. How did that sort of, is that she just intrigued by the lunatics in the corner, or was that, you know, somebody you might have half knew? Or?
It's someone we half knew, mutual friend, and James wasn't actually there on this occasion, but I kind of elaborated slightly on his skill set, so got the gig basically, which subsequently is kind of what we've done the whole time. I just keep assuming that James and now subsequently our team will be able to do something, and then we'll figure it out consequently. But I think that yeah, so it's just like that was luck that we managed to find our first studio space, basically.
Yeah, and what's really reassuring about all of these things, especially for me, is that everybody I've spoken to on this wings it. And I think we all knew that anyway, but I think it's quite reassuring to even hear that some of the most sort of, not necessarily big because of size or just big because everybody knows who they are. It's quite nice to hear that virtually everybody has winged it. And I think I'm waiting for somebody to tell me that they had a big master plan and it was all sort of nicely ironed out. But
yeah,
you know, how it's sort of just baby steps, and it's a lot of the stuff is quite hard to remember because it's all a bit of a blur and it goes so fast.
Absolutely. We pulled together like a financial plan. So we did have like an idea of how much money we wanted to be trying to turn over, and both of us sort of agreed that we would do bits of freelance and that would go into a pot. And so we did have kind of a financial plan, but in the sense that we were so kind of naive to financial planning that the first year was like, if we can get to 100 grand, great. But then like the second year we were like, and then it will be 1 million. So it's like, which obviously is nonsense. It doesn't work like that. But yeah, so yeah, there's definitely an element of winging it. And I think actually there's that kind of, the minute you lose that and you start to take yourself too seriously, I think at that point, like I find the whole industry a bit kind of cringy at that point. I think I'm a bit of an introvert actually. So like the thought of constantly shouting about us, I find quite difficult. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it also is if you don't carry on winging it, there's a sort of argument that you stood still and you're just doing the same stuff because you've sort of perfected it.
Yeah.
And I think the winging it thing, I think winging it's probably not the best word because it makes it sound like you're a bit of a, you know, just a sort of, you know, fly by night sort of thing. But it's more a case of that you're going into territories that you've never experienced before. So there's no reason why you should know. Well, if you shouldn't know about it. That's the whole point, isn't it? Because you're trying to push this thing forward, you know. And you know, for however long you find it interesting, or for the rest of your career, you'll always be hopefully pushing that boundary, won't you? Because it's
absolutely
it's the company.
I mean, you make your own luck as well.
Yeah.
So like there's winging it, and then there's making sure that you're in the right scenarios whereby you can make the best of a situation. I think that's
and also taking like the bull by the horn, so to speak. So like sort of if that Siobhan offers you that opportunity of that studio, yes, we'll have it. You know, it's not like let's think about it because then you'll talk yourself out of it. It's just dive in and sort of hope for the best a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you say, you make your own look, and it sort of it generally turns out all right, doesn't it? You make a really bad choice. You were saying before this, and you just said a minute ago that you'd be up to 8 people, and you've been going 4 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is there much between you and James? Is there much of a long-term plan after that, or is it is just sort of consolidate where you're at and then let's go again and sort of, you know, grow from here or build from here?
Yeah, I think it's always really easy to forget that we've just like, well, we're still in it, but we're coming out of a pandemic. So yeah. I think that we have been growing within it, which I'm proud of. I think we've done really well in that sense. But I think it's kind of difficult to look too far ahead of kind of next year, probably. There's definitely kind of key areas of the business where we want to kind of hire people in for certain specialisms, which we think will completely kind of alter the way that we run things. But more than anything, it's still going back to, we want to have a place where people want to work, and that they really enjoy the work that they do, and they feel free and kind of that we can enable them to do that without any kind of added stress of like overbearing creative directors leering over your shoulder sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about just sort of living for day, isn't there, for today? Because there's a hell of a lot to talk about, 5, 10, 15-year plans, and
yeah,
predicting this, that, and the other, and forecasting where the industry's going to go.
Yeah,
and it's nice just to hear people are just enjoying now and sort of making the most of it and living for what's happening here.
Yeah,
and where you're at, and maybe not dwelling too much on successes, but sort of being proud to sort of say we've come from nothing, and this is where we're at, and this is what we're all about.
yeah.
So, and I think fair play to you. It seems great, and unfortunately, I've just again noticed the time I say this every single week. If anyone tuned in regularly, they'll be well bored of hearing that. But the idea that we haven't mentioned really any of the work, I wanted to talk about that Nexus project so much because it fascinates me just looking at it. I'm just, after about an hour, I have to flick myself off it and say, what were you doing? Like, you've just been staring at this beautiful, that looks like silk or fabric is just floating around, and it's mesmerising. But
Yeah,
I think in the future, it'd be great to have you guys back on, and maybe with James as well, just to talk about the specifics of the projects and how you generate that work and you build it from brief to launch would be really interesting.
yeah, fantastic.
But like I say, I'm conscious of keeping people for too long and taking up half your day before you know it. I probably can guess, but I could natter on forever.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your time, Robin. I hope everybody else enjoyed that. James, don't take the mickey out of him too much once this is finished. And thank you for that picture. It's made my weekend. Yeah, it'd be great to catch up again in the future. Have a great weekend, everybody. And this is the abrupt bit where we end it for all, but it's been a pleasure to know more about you guys and Rockabye.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Take care. See you soon. Thank you, everybody.